The first report on the scope and nature of human trafficking in South Africa is out. Research conducted by the United States Agency International Development and its research partners shows that South Africa is a source, transit and destination country for human trafficking or trafficking in persons, and has identified hotspots, some right here in Johannesburg, for traffickers. The report aimed at providing a more detailed picture of the nature and magnitude of human trafficking. We speak to international consultant and research fellow for the Free State Centre for Human Rights, Dr. Marcel Van der Watt, to hear more about these findings. Good evening to you, Dr. Van der Watt, and welcome to the program. It's a troubling report. What does this research reveal about why it is so easy, ostensibly, to traffic in persons in South Africa?
Yeah, good evening, Iman. The first thing is, the evidence has been frankly overwhelming for many years already. I mean, we've got consistent and coherent evidence that's been building up from the early 90s already. We live in South Africa. We've got a history of slavery. Jan van Riebeeck documented, arrived here with 2 women from Abyssinia. The fact that we, to this day, continue to be surprised by the thought that human trafficking is prevalent in South Africa is frankly mind-boggling. And what we did in this report is we documented knowledge sources which is out there that frankly is omitted or cherry-picked in previous research reports. And as you say, this paints a very, very worrying and unsettling picture.
I mean, what are some of the reasons you think the previous reports have been deficient in really creating the detail and showing the magnitude of this issue?
Great question. Definitions being wrongly used. We see consistently, and I've mentioned at least 4 studies in this report where, where it's research being done with people in prostitution in the sex trade, definitions being hugely truncated. And then you've got actual scenarios, people conveying lived experiences that's in line with the trafficking legislation, and it's not being framed as trafficking. We've got research reports dating back to even the mid-90s and then chiefly late 2000s, where they say how incredibly exploitative and the coercion and the force and the violence in the sex trade, and it's not counted as a trafficking issue, but rather a labor issue. There's many more examples, Iman, but frankly it comes down to ideological lenses, unfortunately, that's been applied to some research studies, and it came at a great cost. And I believe many of those people that have been undercounted over the years are out there, hopefully still alive, but research has been fundamentally failing its research participants, and it's created an enormous misleading perspective of what is really happening in the country.
Marcel, trafficking in persons, and we'll just use the acronym TIP for the purposes of our discussion, is really kind of centered on 2 areas: labor and sexual trafficking, or trade in humans. And disproportionately in South Africa, the problem is around those who are being trafficked, to buyers of sex, for example. And the hotspots that your report identified are the Johannesburg CBD, Saxonwold and Sandringham. It's a mix of low-income and high-income areas. What more do we know about how activities are being carried out there?
The first thing I want to say, Iman, is yes, sex trafficking continue to be the most identified, documented and prosecuted crime. But unfortunately, labor trafficking, which is frankly probably enormous, and it could even eclipse sex trafficking. However, our research falls flat on that area, prosecutions as well. But to your question, and it's difficult to overstate the enormity of this issue. Now, you've referenced geographical areas where trafficking is rife. It's all over, there's not arguably a community or a neighborhood in South Africa that might not be implicated by this issue. But we have to go to the virtual environment. We've got online adult websites, Iman, that advertises on public roadways. I had a conversation recently with there was a full decriminalization lobby, and I've asked this question, what are the adult entertainment websites that you use for the services? They mentioned about 6 or 7, and my response was every one of them have been implicated in sex trafficking matters, some of them in child sex trafficking matters. So we've got, it's an entire complex system that is compromised here. And I'm afraid we're not looking at the evidence. It's now documented. I hope and believe that the conversation around is human trafficking a problem in South Africa is one of the past. Now, from now on forward, we can build on what is there. This is not the perfect study. There is no thing such as a perfect research study, but we've got something to build on now, and we should be very careful not to omit evidence sources that is there, that's always been there, and cherry-picking data.
You know, as you talk, and I really do admire sort of that righteous indignation that you share, because a lot of it is right in front of our faces, and there ought to be something we can do about it. We look at how sophisticated some of these networks are. We have this case right now of a man who's on the run, wanted on those, 740 charges that he faces in court around effectively sex trafficking, and just how, these affect people who are supposed to be pillars of society, including one of the co-accused in that case who's now taken his own life, the advocate Kennedy. So it seems to be quite a sophisticated network. But let's talk then about law enforcement, because you've given something that they can ostensibly work on. But if you look against the backdrop of prosecutions in this particular arena by law enforcement, what does it tell you about the commitment and urgency that our law enforcement has to dealing with this problem?
Thank you for that question. I think we've got incredible champions, incredible police officials, social workers, prosecutors. My argument would be, based on my 20 years working in the space, myself being a Hawks investigator investigating these cases, is that the system is person dependent. So you've got individuals that's doing incredible work, but they're still part of a system that's got enormous crevices. And it's often those crevices that doesn't allow a police official to get a piece of information now and travel from Port Elizabeth to Bloemfontein in a space of an hour. Or you've got shelters that's often full to the brim, or you've got social workers that might not answer their phone after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So the thing is, Iman, it's an entire system that needs to be in line and congruent to work and to push these cases through court. And the cases that I've analyzed in this matter, in the studies, when you look at the successful cases, it was because the system at that moment worked, and you've got individual champions, prosecutors, social workers, and investigators that stepped up frequently after hours, and they did an incredible job. That's where the success comes in. So unfortunately, person dependent and many crevices in the system, and that is documented in the larger report that's embargoed until March. So there's still a lot of insights that's going to be released in the next month or two.
A lot of us will be thinking, as we're listening to this interview, Marcel, about the profile of these traffickers and the sex buyers. What have you learned?
Great question. So there's often preconceived ideas, right? So profile of the perpetrators, several countries all over the world. I mean, we've got multiple nationalities involved in trafficking in South Africa. Those prosecute. Now, remember, you have to understand in terms of proportionality of who the perpetrators are, nationality in South Africa. But South African nationals still eclipses all the nationalities in terms of perpetrators. Gender, very interesting in the successfully prosecuted cases. 38 women being convicted of trafficking, 39 men. So that's very interesting when you look at male and female and the role that women have to also perpetrate and enable these criminal networks. We've got victims of trafficking from several African countries, and then we've got obviously some nationalities that absolutely dominate certain aspects of exploitation and trafficking in South Africa.
You want to share a bit more about which those are?
Sure, it's well documented. Now, again, why we should be reading the history of these documents and these reports has always been there. So we know a couple of cases at the moment. Labor trafficking, we've seen several Chinese nationals involved in labor-related trafficking. The commercial sex trade, sex trafficking, absolutely dominated by Nigerian criminal networks. Police cases that I've been investigating back to the early 2000s, successfully prosecuted cases, The annual United States TIP report consistently referred to Nigerian criminal networks as dominating the commercial sex trade in several provinces and cities in South Africa. And again, the thing here, Iman, is these are not ethnic-based syndicates. These are loosely connected networks, and it's relationships of convenience. That idea of this hierarchy of criminal networks, that's something way back to the 1940s and 50s. Nowadays, it's relationships of convenience. Today I use you, tomorrow I don't. You know, a police official that's got a drug addiction is easily pulled into a network for his contacts in being able to facilitate deals, somebody at Home Affairs. So, but what we are seeing is, and these are cases I've personally testified in as well, it's documented in the study, that there are, like the latter example that I've used, that is just in that space. And often we see one of the members that's being prosecuted, and a host of them are basically still out there perpetrating these crimes.
We'll certainly find out more in the lead up to March when the rest of that report will be released. But thank you for sharing the details of what you have tonight, concerning, and certainly a lot of work that the country and its law enforcement has to do in tackling trafficking and human trafficking in South Africa. International consultant and research fellow, Free State Centre for Human Rights, Dr. Marcel Van der Watt.